Joe Biden not only is embarrassing himself here in the United States, but now on the international stage. There's so much going on with Hollywood, with the DNC, with the Obamas. To help me go through all of it, I have Reagan Reese from the Daily Caller. Reagan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So you are a White House correspondent for the Daily Caller. You're there in Washington, D.C. You see the inner workings of D.C. You interact with Karine Jean-Pierre and her interesting ways of answering and evading questions. I wanted to jump in on something. Dr. Gupta, the doctor who regularly appears on CNN, has said that the American people need to know whether President Joe Biden is mentally fit to be president. He said the White House and Joe Biden owe it to us to put this worry to bed. Do you think the president is going to give into this pressure? Will he take a test? Is he going to continue to say that he's fine, that he's able to lead the nation, or will he bow out? What are your thoughts from what you're seeing and hearing?
Yeah, I really expect President Biden to still be the nominee. There are a couple reasons why. I think with this whole damage control post debate that the Biden campaign is really stretching that out and prolonging it. And so we've seen them, set up a bunch of tests for the president or attempts to ease Democrats' mind. And those have been these radio hits with Wisconsin, these campaign events, the ABC News interview. We just saw this NATO press conference last night. Now the president is going to do an interview with NBC News. And notice that they're not boom, boom, boom within 24 hours. If somebody was calling for my candidate to drop out and I was on a campaign staff, you think, the next morning you would be like, oh, you don't think he's fit for office? Here are 6 interviews that we're going to do in a day. We're going to pack his schedule. Look at how awake and alert he is. But instead, they've been over the past couple of weeks, and I assume that they're only going to keep spreading them out. It almost seems like it's an attempt to kind of keep stretching these tests and these opportunities to prove to Democrats that the president is fit for office until the DNC convention, where they finally can be like, oh, it's too late. We are the nominee. But I also think that President Biden is very confident and has an ego, and it's going to have to be his decision. And I think the circumstances around him will also have to be correct. It's almost going to have to be his idea to step down, some way to preserve his legacy as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if First Lady Jill Biden and first son Hunter Biden are, never going to let their dad step down because they love that power. President Biden has said he's not going to pardon Hunter, but if he reversed his decision, that wouldn't be the first time that a politician lied. So I could totally see Hunter also being like, hey, you need to stay because I need to get that pardon, Dad.
Yeah. I agree with you that they are trying to do this he's okay campaign, but he goes on a radio show where it's now come out that multiple hosts, the questions were pre-planned so that he could practice. On top of that, he still calls himself the first Black female president on the international stage. He calls Vice President Kamala Harris Vice President Trump on the at the NATO conference. He calls Volodymyr Zelensky Vladimir Putin. Like, these are big flubs that I know he'll recover from. But if you're trying to prove that you're mentally capable, it's just like hit piece after hit piece after hit piece keeps coming out that he's actually struggling and not mentally competent. I know that you've written about this and been researching this. So help me understand this. To me, it seems like Hollywood, which is the mechanism that got Obama elected, Hollywood and Obama are turning their backs on Biden. They're doing it gently. They're trying to give him a graceful off-ramp. He doesn't seem to want to take it. Now I'm reading that Obama and Pelosi are having behind-the-scenes conversations. What do you understand about Obama's role and Hollywood and Pelosi? What's really going on there?
Well, there's been a bunch of like Obama world, former Obama staffers, George Clooney being perhaps maybe the biggest domino to fall in all of this, in calling for president to step aside. And, I think it's really interesting, this report that Obama was aware that George Clooney was going to publish an op-ed in the New York Times, which, by the way, the Biden White House hates the New York Times right now, calling for him to step down, and didn't choose to tell him not to. And I think that instance right there is all we need to know, because, it set off this string reaction, this Clooney op-ed. So Clooney hosted that fundraiser in California that the president attended with Clinton and Obama. And that's where we got that viral video of President Biden freezing and being led off the stage by Obama. 3 weeks ago, that was a cheap fake, and the media was buying it, or helping the White House. That's probably how I would frame it, helping the White House cover that up. The New York Times was calling it a cheap fake. The Associated Press was saying it was running fact checks on what this video was, saying it was edited differently. Now, as we're seeing the president's decline be, something that we're allowed to talk about, we're seeing these outlets cite that video as a piece of evidence that the president was declining, which is, wildly offensive to the American people, that they just tried to pull one over on them and gaslight them into thinking that that video was fake and edited. And now a couple weeks later, we're citing it as evidence that the president's too old to be in office. But I mean, just about an hour ago, the Washington Post came out with an article that was inside that Clooney fundraiser. And turns out a bunch of donors were, attending that fundraiser and very concerned about how the president appeared, and said, oh yeah, he, seemed really distant in the meet and greet lines, and he was tripping over his words, and he seemed frail. And that is and that's all this result of Clooney deciding to step up and say, hey, I'm going to call for President Biden to not run for reelection, based off of what I saw at that fundraiser. It set off this chain reaction. And I bet you that former President Barack Obama knew that.
Yeah, no, I've read that that he definitely knew that. The other thing is like, if I had helped raise like $25 million from my closest friends for somebody that I witnessed with my own eyes, unable to lead the country, I would feel pretty stupid. Mm-hmm. And I think Clooney, he remained quiet. I'm sure there was a lot of pressure on him. But then after the debate, he said that Democrat leadership needs to quit asking 51 million Democrats to ignore their eyes and pretend like we didn't see him have a terrible debate. Do you think Clooney's trying to be on the right side of this, where he's saying, wait a minute, I was misled. I can't go along with the lie. Biden is not the big, powerful, super intelligent president that we've all been told he was.
I wonder to what extent all of these Democrats piping up and deciding that they were going to call for President Biden to step down come from that internal pressure and maybe wanting to impress certain members of the party. I think what you're seeing with the press now in the White House briefing room, we saw kind of an eruption. I was in that briefing room. It was very tense. It was very shocking. We've never really seen the White House press corps yell at Karine Jean-Pierre, specifically the legacy media outlets. And CBS News, Ed O'Keefe pressed Karine Jean-Pierre and said, no, you're lying to us. You are being misleading. You're not answering the question. And she was very taken aback by that. And she was like, that's a personal attack, which it's not. And, when I look at the media, who's now demanding more information from the White House and kind of feels like they've been deceived by the White House on the president's cognitive decline, I think part of what we're seeing from them is the embarrassment that they chose not to call it out beforehand. And they're getting some backlash because it's hard to be in the White House covering the president and not recognize that the president is old and declining. I've been on the South Lawn before asking questions of the president, This one instance, I always tell, it comes to mind. He came out of the Oval Office. He walked down to tell reporters that he was going to be announcing new sanctions on Russia. And then as he started to go to Marine One, me and another reporter kind of caught his attention, and we were yelling at him. I was asking, do you regret your day one executive orders on immigration? And he and I locked eyes, and I could just, no wheels were turning. He really just seemed like the lights were on and no one was home. And 10, 15 seconds later, after staring at me, he just turned around, mouth agape, and walked to Marine One, shuffled, I guess, to Marine One. And that was a really jarring moment. And a lot of people will ask me who aren't in this world of politics that I'm at when I go see my friends in the Midwest, is President Biden really that old? Is what I read in the media true? And I always bring up that anecdote. And that for me really confirmed, yes, the president is declining cognitively, and it's something that everyone should be concerned about. So I do think that White House reporters were aware and are starting to feel embarrassed that they didn't catch it and report on it before, and are now, rushing to get that out there, starting to blame the White House for deceiving them. And I could see how that similar logic or that argument could be applied to a bunch of these other donors or allies of the president.
Yeah. I've been saying on my show that he has dementia since July of 2020. It's all documented. So it was just something that I recognized as I watched him speak. I was like, wait a minute, there's something not right here. And then I started thinking, okay, wait a minute. Why did they keep him in his basement while he was campaigning? Okay, they were kind of using COVID. They've put the entire American people in a bad situation. For example, if this wasn't the president of the United States, and you saw President Barack Obama gently, with a big smile, grab a senior citizen by the arm and gently lead him off, you would think, okay, this guy, he's got charm, he's got class. Jill Biden, after the debate, the cameras don't blank out. They actually keep filming, and she's holding his hand. Here, Joe, there's a step. Make sure to carefully step down. We don't want you to trip. And then he goes over and shakes the hands of the CNN. You would say, wow, here's someone taking care of an elderly man that, shows good morals, that you care about, your elders. But where this is the president of the United States, we've got enemies that would love to kill all of us. We've got people that would love to wipe out our economy. We're in the middle of two major wars. So from that perspective, that's why I think a lot of people are going, wait a minute, you're playing on my sympathy that I'm a good person, but at the same time, you're supposed to be the most powerful leader in the world, and we're not seeing that power.
Yeah, that's why I think that this cover up from the White House is so offensive. And what we've seen in the White House briefing room, explaining to the American people that what you saw on the debate stage, the president, pale, mouth agape, looking lost, and repeatedly stumbling over answers, was because he had a cold. And then, later that evolved into, he was jet lagged. But he was jet lagged from a trip that happened 2 weeks before. And it just, I have to ask, how stupid does the White House think the American people are? How stupid does the White House think that my readers are? And it's very offensive. And we've seen the same as this whole cover-up has progressed. We have been pressing Karine Jean-Pierre on these doctor's appointments, this neurologist and Parkinson's expert that's appearing at the White House. And, she's telling us that she can't reveal the name of the doctor that was at the White House. That's public information. So that doesn't make sense. And then you ask her about when the president was having doctor's appointments, and she says he hasn't seen him since his physical. He has an annual physical. He hasn't checked in with the doctor since February. President Biden later goes on to say, oh yeah, I just saw my doctor the other week. Well, then you go back to Karine and say, why did you say that the president hasn't seen the doctor since February, but the president is saying he just saw the doctor last week? She was like, I was talking about medical examinations. What? It's It's also like I want to almost do a thread on Twitter, kind of laying it out, because the timeline myself, as somebody who's like very devoted to covering this, this is my beat. It's confusing, and it's definitely a bit of gaslighting. And to think that, yeah, I can pull this over on the American people, that they'll totally understand if I, was talking about a medical examination and the president was talking about a verbal check-in, whatever that means, that they're going to believe it and they're going to buy it. That's offensive. And, like you said, this is the president of the United States. The world is watching us and they're seeing this, and I'm sure that they're laughing.
Yeah. I have to imagine every day she's like, okay, I've got to go out there and cover up for the president, because she gets to have one-on-one contact. We don't. She
Right.
gets to prepare, hey, what take do you want on this story? Which angle, which avenue, which path? Like, get some insight. She sees how Jill Biden interacts with him. Like, she has that insight. And so I think, like, Jill Biden, she is part of the cover-up. Kamala Harris, who's supposed to be next in line, she's part of the lie and the cover-up. Karine Jean-Pierre, part of the lie and the cover-up. And then they say, why don't you guys trust us? Because you lie to us every single day. That's why we don't trust you. But you calling this the White House cover-up, that's exactly what it is. He's done less press conferences than any other president. He puts less time in at the office. He's on vacation constantly. I think the whole thing is to keep him away from the press. Even when they have these meetings, it's like all of a sudden you'll see like an outtake where they film just a little bit longer, and you guys are being yelled at. Get out of the room, get out of the room. And Biden smirks like, ha, ha, ha. You guys can't ask me any questions because I'm not going to let you, right? He knows that he has all of that cover in order to deceive the American people about his health.
Yeah, this is an administration that pledged to be the most transparent administration, to treat the press better than the Trump administration. And I've actually heard from reporters just in and around the White House that no, it was so much better to cover the Trump administration. There was one day that I was on White House pool duty, and we did not see the president at all. We had a White House press briefing, and it was pretty low-key day. I think that was the only event on the schedule. Never saw President Biden. One reporter told me under the Trump administration, this never would have happened. We would have seen Trump. He would have been around. We would have gotten to ask him questions. And so it doesn't seem to be very transparent to me if you're kind of hiding the president and tucking him away. And, to all the things that they've done to conceal his age, now the president's wearing different types of sneakers. He's walking up the smaller staircase at Air Force One. And my personal favorite that I think has really flown under the radar and hasn't been, talked about enough was that these aides are escorting the president from Marine One to the White House and vice versa. And, I've been there trying to ask the president a question before. And, with my colleagues, we're yelling questions at the president. There's a slew of White House aides accompanying him as he walks from the White House to the South Lawn. One of my colleagues, I could tell, caught the president's ear. He kind of turned his head a little bit to turn back and look at us. And typically when there aren't aides there, if you say something that sparks the president's attention, he'll turn around and walk over and take a question. I've seen him do it before. But in this particular instance, one of the aides recognized that and just started talking to the president. And then he, got distracted, forgot about the question, and moved on to the South Lawn. And those are all attempts to keep the president from talking to the press, because you don't want these verbal slip-ups. I previously reported that from January to April that the White House had corrected Biden's official transcripts 148 times. And so this isn't something that, is all of a sudden just popped up at the presidential debate. This is something we've been covering and we've noticed. And the legacy media has just decided to wake up now.
Yeah. Wow. Good catch on that. Going back to President Barack Obama, Do you think behind the scenes he's thinking, okay, I'm the most popular Democrat alive. I need to carefully step back in behind the scenes and try to pull the party back together and rebuild that trust, find a new candidate, help Joe exit gracefully. Like, does he feel the pressure of being the person behind the scenes to save the Democrat Party?
I think that's a good question. I wonder what Obama's mindset is as a former president, one who, has a pretty good legacy leaving the White House. I can't imagine that you would want to risk getting your hands dirty, that you would want to risk, being responsible for the one who, pulled Joe Biden out of the race, or being responsible for the one for the Democrats, losing the White House to Donald Trump, this massive threat to democracy, as the left would say. So I'm curious to learn more about President Obama's mindset. I think we've seen some stories about the interesting dynamic between Biden and Obama. There have been previous rifts and tension, and times that Biden throughout his administration has kind of made jabs like, oh, I was right on Middle East foreign policy, or Obama would be so jealous of all that I've accomplished. So I do think there's a little bit of a rivalry and tension there. I'm curious how First Lady Michelle Obama could also be playing into that. We know that she doesn't like to be involved in politics, but she's also a close friend of Hunter Biden's ex-wife. And Axios previously reported that she was, very upset with how the Biden family exiled Hunter's ex-wife, Kathleen. And that's kind of caused her to not want to campaign for Joe Biden. And so I think, when that marriage could be very influential, that Michelle could be influencing Obama and how he acts in all of this.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. You recently put out a piece talking about how the Trump campaign is firing on all cylinders. There's a lot of good things happening with the RNC. As you know, they dropped Ronna McDaniel. They picked up Laura Trump. Help my audience understand this article and what you mean by the Trump campaign firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, the Trump campaign is so unique because President Trump is running for office for the White House for the third time. That's something we don't really ever see. And so there's like so much to look at and to see how his campaign has evolved. And in 2016, it was kind of this us against the world mentality. No one really expected Donald Trump to win. There were a bunch of leaks and drama within the campaign. When President Trump actually did get elected, they were really not prepared to take over the White House. There wasn't a transition team that was built up like other presidents would. In 2020, the team was kind of, rocked by this pandemic. It created some rifts. There weren't people who were still on board. It also kind of hindered the way that the Trump campaign was able to fully harness the power of the RNC. But now in 2024, over the last 8 years, President Trump has had the ability to figure out who is that loyalist, who is really, devoted to him and his mission. And they are just moving like this well-oiled machine. And it's really remarkable to see a Trump campaign that's disciplined. I think a perfect example of this, and I wrote this article before the debate, but I felt like the President Trump's demeanor at the debate really spoke to the essence of what my reporting was about, that the Trump campaign's disciplined, there's no drama, there's no leaks, and everybody is on board and fully incorporated. He's, harnessed this power of the RNC. He's taken it over and instilled his own leadership. They're focusing on things he wants them to focus on. And then we see him at the RNC, and that wasn't the Trump that we saw in the 2020 debates or the 2016 debates, kind of taking jabs at his opponent, interrupting, giving those funny one-liners. He was disciplined. He was focused. One thing I picked up on is he stared straight ahead the entire time. He barely looked at Joe Biden. And I think a lot of that had to do with how the debate was structured. But that definitely played into his favor because he got to just sit back and watch Joe Biden completely crumble before his eyes. And so this disciplined Trump that we're even seeing now as the Democratic Party implodes on itself, the Biden campaign keeps trying to play off the fact that Trump hasn't really been seen out in public in 2 weeks. Why would you go out in public when your enemy is completely imploding on itself and crumbling and falling apart? You don't want to, draw attention to yourself. And I think that's a unique and new strategy that we haven't seen from the Trump campaign that shows a different level of competence and, just all around greatness, I think, in this campaign.
Yeah. Well, they're raising money like they haven't raised for the RNC in a long time. The number of first-time donors is at the highest level the Republicans have seen in a very long time. He was incredibly composed. I was shocked. I thought he was going to come out. I had read that they had told him, go back and watch your first debate. You came out like an alpha male, like straight out of prison, just like ready to attack, And this time he was composed. There were so many opportunities where he could have mocked Joe Biden for his mistakes, and he just sat there, looked forward. At the same time, people said he didn't answer a lot of the questions from Dana and from Jake Tapper. But this was also his first public opportunity to defend himself after being under all of these gag orders. And he was, somewhat still a little bit gagged, but I liked his hand gesture. They would ask the question, he would put his finger and then point over to Joe and then just, come out with an incredible answer. But he was incredibly composed. He looked very presidential. He hands down won the debate there for sure. I wanted to get into something that's just come out recently. The Democrats using every single senator in the Senate to block the SAVE Act, which would block illegal immigrants from voting in our election. They're saying that this bill is racist. They're saying ID is racist. They're saying not allowing illegals to vote might block a legal person from voting. That this is Jim Crow thinking. To me, I'm absolutely disgusted that they want illegal immigrants voting in our elections. That discredits my vote. That discredits your vote, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on them blocking the SAVE Act?
Yeah, this is something that Republicans should really harness and make a key part of their messaging. This is something that really fires up a majority of the base. We saw them really fired up about it in 2020, this whole idea of election integrity. And the concept of election integrity has really been abandoned by the GOP for the last couple decades. They were under a consent decree since 1980 that was lifted in 2018. And it kind of hindered Republicans from being able to file these election integrity lawsuits and push back on these Democratic efforts. And, now, as it was previously explained to me by an RNC official in 2020, they first started to get into this election integrity efforts and really, called it a proof of concept. That's how it was explained to me. 2024, this election cycle, it's the first time that Republicans are going full throttle on this election integrity effort. And with Ronna McDaniel, the previous chairwoman of the RNC, you never really heard about it. I thought the messaging was rather weak on it. I did a piece, investigating what Republicans were up to because I didn't know. It was very hard to find information on it. They have a podcast, but it wasn't getting very many views or getting the message out. But since President Trump has taken over the RNC, that has been, in my opinion, the face of the RNC is election integrity. This is something that we are really going to pay attention to. And it's something that President Trump's base cares about. So, if you really want to rile up maybe those swing state voters, those independents, I think this is something that Republicans can use to their advantage in this election cycle. It's really a blatant example of what the Democratic Party is like and how they want elections to be run.
Yeah, I agree. I think the election integrity it is a huge deal, especially with just in the last 60 days, Pennsylvania coming out 3 years later saying there's close to 100,000 ballots with bad dates that should have never been counted. That would have changed the election. Down in Georgia, 380,761 missing ballot images. They're now saying they don't believe those ballots ever existed. Issues in Michigan, issues in Wisconsin. Now Hillary Clinton's lawyer trying to put the ballot boxes back in Wisconsin and being successful there. Michigan now saying you can't question elections unless you go to the Secretary of State, who happens to be an anti-election integrity Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson. So yes, we are pushing back. They need to continue to push back. Laura Trump said this time around they have thousands of lawyers that are already contracted, ready to go. A large amount of the money that people are donating, it's not going to keep Donald Trump out of jail. It's going to keep election integrity. So I think you're right in pointing out that this is a huge part of the new RNC under Laura Trump.
Yeah, it's exciting to see. And I've talked to a lot of experts about this election integrity effort, mainly going in with the question of, are we going to see a repeat of 2020, where the Trump campaign filed a bunch of lawsuits to kind of overturn some of these election laws to get things investigated. And they were told by lawyers, you're too late. And a lot of these, lawyers have told me, yeah, we have a lot of catching up to do because of that consent decree, but we are in a much better place than where we were in 2020. And it's going to be an ongoing effort for Republicans. Like you mentioned, that poll watching, that protect the vote is something different that we're seeing the RNC really go full throttle into. Christina Bobb, a former Trump lawyer and news anchor, is kind of heading up that grassroots effort. And I had the opportunity to talk to her about what they're doing and really honing in on all of those swing states, making sure that there are 100,000 volunteers across these states monitoring the polls on election day. And like you said, these lawyers as well, being there to identify issues and to prevent being too late to all of these legal problems and making sure that Republicans are being proactive. So it's definitely a front that we haven't seen Republicans harness before. And so it's going to be, interesting to see how this affects the 2024 election.
Yeah. Now, isn't that interesting? Trump's lawyer that is heading up the election integrity is the very person they're trying to send to jail for the rest of her life for questioning election integrity. Pretty sad state. Hopefully she comes out on top with that. Reagan, thank you so much for coming on and spending time with me. If people want to follow you online, where's the best place that I can send them?
Yeah, Twitter and Instagram, Reagan Reese. Very simple. It's spelled like the president.
Okay, great. I will put that down below. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.